You don't have to necessarily have done anything wrong for things to get completely out of control. It's a terrifying doctrine, but it's not a hopeless doctrine because it still says that there's a way forward, there's a pathway forward, and the pathway forward is to adopt a mode of being that has some nobility so that you can tolerate yourself and perhaps even have some respect for yourself as someone who's capable of standing up in the face of that terrible vulnerability and suffering, and that the pathway forward, as far as the existentialists are concerned, is by, well, certainly by the avoidance of deceit, particularly in language, but also by the adoption of responsibility for the conditions of existence and some attempt on your part to actually rectify them. And the thing that's so interesting about that is, well, two, as far as I'm concerned, and some of this is from clinical experience. You know, if you take people, and I've told you this, and you expose them voluntarily to things that they are avoiding and are afraid of, you know, that they know they need to overcome in order to meet their goals, their self-defined goals. If you can teach people to stand up in the face of the things they're afraid of, they get stronger. And you don't know what the upper limits to that are, because you might ask yourself, like, if for 10 years, if you didn't avoid doing what you knew you needed to do, by your own definitions, right, within the value structure that you've created to the degree that you've done that, what would you be like? Well, you know, there are remarkable people who come into the world from time to time, and there are people who do find out over decades-long periods what they could be like if they were who they were, if they spoke their being forward. And they'd get stronger and stronger and stronger, and we don't know the limits to that. We do not know the limits to that. And so you could say, well, in part, perhaps the reason that you're suffering unbearably can be left at your feet, because you're not everything you could be, and you know it. And of course, that's a terrible thing to admit, and it's a terrible thing to consider, but there's real promise in it, right? Because it means that perhaps there's another way that you could look at the world, and another way that you could act in the world, so what it would reflect back to you would be much better than what it reflects back to you now. My experience is with people that we're probably running at about 51% of our capacity. I mean, you can think about this yourselves. I often ask undergraduates how many hours a day you waste, or how many hours a week you waste, and the classic answer is something like 4 to 6 hours a day. You know, inefficient studying, watching things on YouTube that not only do you not want to watch, that you don't even care about, that make you feel horrible about watching after you're done. That's probably 4 hours right there. You know, you think, well, that's 25 hours a week, it's 100 hours a month, that's 2.5 full work weeks, it's half a year of work weeks per year. And if your time is worth $20 an hour, which is a radical underestimate, it's probably more like 50 if you think about it in terms of deferred wages. If you're wasting 20 hours a week, you're wasting $50,000 a year. And you are doing that right now. And it's because you're young, wasting $50,000 a year is a way bigger catastrophe than it would be for me to waste it, because I'm not going to last nearly as long. And so if your life isn't everything it could be, you could ask yourself, well, what would happen if you just stopped wasting the opportunities that are in front of you? You'd be who knows how much more efficient, 10 times more efficient, 20 times more efficient. That's the Pareto distribution. You have no idea how efficient people get. It's off the charts. Well, and if we all got our act together collectively and stopped making things worse, because that's another thing people do all the time, not only do they not do what they should to make things better, they actively attempt to make things worse because they're spiteful or resentful or arrogant or deceitful or homicidal or genocidal, or all of those things all bundled together in an absolutely pathological package. If people stopped really, really trying just to make things worse, we have no idea how much better they would get just because of that. What happens to you as you stroll merrily on your way through life? Well, what happens is that as you're moving from point A to point B, you encounter things. And people think that what they encounter are objects, but that's not the case. First of all, most of the things that you encounter, many of the things, are actually other people, and they're not objects. They're too damn complex. And even apart from the social world, the things that you encounter aren't objects. They seem to be something more like tools or obstacles. And I don't mean that we see objects and turn them into tools or obstacles. I mean that we see tools and obstacles, because what happens is that when you array yourself towards a goal, then the world transforms itself into things that get in the way of that goal and three things. Things that get in the way of the goal, those are things you don't like. Things that facilitate your movement towards the goal, those are things that you like. And irrelevant things. And mostly you want irrelevant things because there's just too damn many things. So the category of irrelevant is one you really like. So most of everything is irrelevant if you have a good plan. A few things are good because they move you forward, and some other things are not so good. You want to go around the not so good things if you can manage them, unless you like to run head forth into like brick walls, which is not particularly, it's a learning experience, but I wouldn't repeat it too many times. You want the world to array itself as a set of, we could say, tools. Now, what happens is that you have this perceptual system that's mediated by dopamine. It's the same system that cocaine activates, or methamphetamine, or the drugs that people really like to take. And it's the dopaminergic system that responds with positive emotion to indications that you've encountered something that will facilitate your movement towards a goal. And that's really important to know. Because people tend to think that they're happy because they achieve goals, and that's not true. What's true, because as soon as you achieve a goal, then you have a problem, which is what's the next goal. And that's actually a big problem. You encounter that as soon as you graduate from university, for example. That's right. I made this joke before. Graduation day, you're like king of the university hierarchy, undergraduate hierarchy. Day after, you're unemployed potential Starbucks employee, right? So it's like, so obviously the accomplishment per se as a source of reward is problematic, because when you accomplish, you run the frame to its end, and then you have the problem of needing a new frame. So that's a problem. But if what you're encountering instead are things that will move you along your way, it's like, hey, that's great, and that's where you get your positive motivation. And so that's really that's so much worth thinking about. You can think about that for a year, and that wouldn't even be enough to think about it, because here's what it means. It means, in some sense, that the Buddhists are right with their claim about Maya, M-A-Y-A, which means that people live in an illusion. And what they mean by that is, well, you have goal, whatever your goal is, and that goal gives relevance to the world. And you could change the relevance of the world in a snap just by changing your goal. You can do that. And so then you think, well, it's sort of an illusion because you can just change it. Now, you don't want to push that line of argumentation too far, because even if the specific point can be changed, the fact that you're in one of these frames cannot be changed. And so you have to be in a frame, although you get to pick the frame. So there's still an absolute there, which is that you have to be in a frame, and that is not a trivial absolute. It's a very major absolute. So then you think, okay, all of your positive emotion is going to be experienced in relationship to the goal. Well, then we think, well, you could use some positive emotion. It's a good thing. Positive emotion inhibits anxiety and disappointment and frustration and pain. It does all that. Technically, it does that. That's why a football player with a broken thumb who wants to score a touchdown can go out there and, play the football game, even though it's a kind of an arbitrary goal, right? It's like, really, you're going to go out there and like risk your hand to fire a pigskin through some poles? It's like, well, you can say the same sort of cynical thing about most of the things that people do, but you can't say the cynical thing about the fact that they have to do things. So you have a point, you have your aim, you have your ambition, and then that's what turns the world into a potentially positive place. And here's the kicker. This is so cool. The higher the aim, the more the positive emotion. So that's you think, well, why should I bother? Why should I bother doing something lofty and difficult? It's like, because it's worth it. That's why. Because the alternative is stupid suffering. Because because what happens is, like, you don't need a framework in order to suffer. You can just lay there day after day and suffer, right? That's easy. So that's the default condition. If you don't have a lofty ambition, then you suffer miserably. And the reason for that is life is really complex, short, finite, full of suffering, and beyond you. And so you can just lay there and think about that, and it's horrible. And so that's not helpful. It's just not useful. And so, people often say life is meaningless. It's like, no, it's not. That's wrong. Because if it was meaningless, that'd be easy. You could just sit there and do nothing, and it wouldn't matter, right? It'd be like you were like a lobotomized sheep, It's just irrelevant. But that isn't what happens. When people say that life has no meaning, that isn't what they mean. What they mean is, I'm suffering stupidly and intensely, and I don't know what to do about it. Well, the suffering is meaningful. It's just not the kind of meaning you want. So how do you get out of that? You adopt, you note the baseline of suffering, which is very, 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 very high. And then you say to yourself, okay, I need to do something that justifies that. And that's not so easy, because the baseline for suffering is high. If you're going to make something of yourself, let's say, so that it's worthwhile to exist in the world, then you have to aim at something that's so well structured that you can say, yeah, earthquakes, cancer, death of my family, dissolution of my goals, ultimate futility of life, and the heat death of the universe. Hey, it doesn't matter, it's worth it. In Alice in Wonderland, when Alice goes down the rabbit hole, that's the underworld, right? So now she's gone into the substructure of being. And she meets the Red Queen. And the Red Queen is Mother Nature. And Mother Nature is running around yelling, off with their heads, off with their heads, which is, of course, what Mother Nature does. And she tells Alice, in my kingdom, you have to run as fast as you can just to stay in the same place. And that's exactly right. And that's a description of, in fact, evolutionary biologists, psychologists have picked up on that phrase. They call it the Red Queen problem. And the Red Queen problem is everything's after you all the time and you're not smart enough to do anything about it or enough about it. And so that's a permanent existential problem. So how do you deal with that? You've got a biological structure. So your embodiment is part of the solution to the problem. And then you're enculturated. And because you're enculturated, you're taught a lot of things that you need to know, but mostly what you're taught is how to communicate with other people in an acceptable manner. And then once you can communicate with people in an acceptable manner, then you can outsource your problems constantly, which you're doing constantly. And so we're in this continual dynamic exchange of problem solving. So if you're a socialized person, that's what you get access to. And that's something to know if you're going to have kids. And I mentioned this, I think, in a previous lecture. The purpose of being a parent for very young children is to make your children exceptionally socially desirable by the age of 4. Because if you can do that, they're set. Because everyone wants them around. And as soon as everybody wants them around, they want to play with them, they want to cooperate with them, they want to compete with them. It's like the door's open, and they stay sane because they've got all sorts of people who actually like them that are helping them out. And so that's your goal, is to make them as socially acceptable as you possibly can, as socially desirable as you possibly can. And that doesn't mean you render them obedient without spirit, right? That's a tyrant's mode of enforcing social acceptability. It's like, never do anything wrong. Well, that's not any way to, I mean, that's a good piece of advice, you know, like, but it's missing the other half, which is do a bunch of things that are right so that people are thrilled to have you around. And encourage that. That's what you want to do as a parent. So you said here too, let's go for another quote here. Throughout your life, this is very practical advice too, and I think it's very wise from a therapeutic perspective. Throughout your life, you have people you look up to. Okay, so let's think about that. You look up. What does that mean? Why up? Well, up is something that beckons from a distance. It's like a light on a hill, and we automatically assume that those who we admire are people we look up to. So that specifies a distance and a direction, and it's uphill. It's up toward a higher vista, let's say. So there are automatically people who elicit that spirit in you. You have noticed the way.
Might also imply that there's some sense of struggle required to get to that point, because it's easier to go downhill than it is uphill.
Yes, definitely. That's right. It's an uphill trek. And it also implies judgment, because if someone's above you, then they also serve as a judge, or you serve as a judge in relationship to them, because you compare yourself unfavorably with them. And that can also inspire you to tear them down. That's really the story of Cain and Abel, and that's a major story. You have noticed the way a teacher, parent, coworker, mentor, or friend interacts with others, and you come away thinking, That behavior simply works better. They are respected, admired, and successful. And you find yourself wondering why that is. You do if you're a little bit humble instead of being envious, right? Because otherwise you think, well, that damn crook, he just stole his position, and that's why he's got it. But if you're a bit humble, you might think, well, no, that guy looks successful. Maybe he knows something I don't. You are noticing attributes and character traits that are good and worth aspiring to. You are noticing attributes that make certain people more successful than others. You are noticing what a hero looks like. And in the process, you are discovering a path made up of desirable personality traits that helps you ascend in social hierarchies. That's Jacob's ladder, by the way. That ladder that is the hierarchy to the good. That's the vision Jacob has of the pathway to God, is that it's a hierarchical structure with the thing that's ultimately good at the pinnacle, by definition, right? The best of all possible goods. And then there are intermediary structures all the way up, and beings inhabiting those structures. And this isn't metaphysical. It's like if you find someone you admire, the reason you admire them is because they're higher up in that heavenly hierarchy, so to speak, than you are. And your whole nervous system tells you that. You're compelled to listen, you're compelled to pay attention by the action of your own unconscious mind.
There's a version of you that never sleeps in, never skips training, never wastes time. There's a version of you who never fails. It is waiting for you. Genuinely ask yourself a question, you at home. If you had done those things for the last 2 years, you never skipped a training, you never wasted time, you never scrolled TikTok, you never sat aimlessly on the internet typing in garbage, never played video games, you never wasted time. You never skipped training, you were training every single day. You never slept in, you were never lazy. There's this version of you. Imagine the person you would be. Genuinely imagine what you would look like. Imagine where you would live. Imagine the car you would drive. Imagine how much your woman would respect you. Imagine the love you would see in her eyes when she looks at you with adoration like a king. Imagine your existence. That person is waiting for you, and the only thing that's stopping you from being that person is your monumental laziness. You can have it. The universe is very giving. It will give you anything you work for. I've never seen somebody try for something with all of their might and not get it. The only people who do not have the things they want are the people who do not try for them. I've never seen a person wake up and say, my only dedication in life is to solve a Rubik's Cube and fail. You are not stupid. You are not incompetent. You are lazy and arrogant. It's extremely important you understand that that person is waiting for you, and you are declining that version of yourself. In the multiverse, in the many different versions of the universe that exist, there is a version of you that does those exact things, and he is a greater person than you can even fathom. You can transform yourself into that guy. You can be a top G. That's exactly what I did. I knew who I was going to have to end up being before I became that person. My brother and I are not from rich families. We are not from advantaged beginnings, but I knew I had to be a big, strong, fighting billionaire. That's what I knew I had to be. Discipline is the key to success. If you cannot force yourself to do something you don't want to do, how are you ever going to put yourself through the suffering required for greatness? If you cannot force yourself to train when you do not want to train, if you cannot force yourself to work when you don't want to work, if you can't force yourself to not log into Pornhub or force yourself to eat right, how can you possibly ever become a monumentally successful person if you cannot control yourself long enough to do what must be done as opposed to what you feel like doing? The only people who get to live their lives based on how they feel are women and children. Children can cry because they feel like crying, as can a woman. A woman can start an argument because she feels like arguing, as can a child. A man must do what he is supposed to do irregardless of how he feels. That is the key component to masculinity, is discipline. If you do not have the discipline to dedicate yourself to anything, you are going to fail and be crushed by the people who can. If you only go to the gym when you feel like going to the gym, you're never going to be as strong as the people who go to the gym when they don't feel like going to the gym. That is a reality of life. So, I train every single day. I've actually heard from some people saying, you overtrain. And I explained to them, one, I don't believe in rest. I'm not you. I'm not pussy, and I'm not broke like you are, Mr. Fitness Trainer, standing around the gym teaching people for $50 an hour. I don't need to listen to you. Secondly, I don't train because because I want to get bigger. I train every day because it is difficult to train every day. It hurts. I don't want to. I wake up and I'm busy. I have other things to do. I don't feel like doing it. So I force myself to do it 7 days a week, 365 days a year, so that I know I'm the kind of person who can do what he doesn't want to do when it needs to be done. I am that man. And it's more of a mental exercise than a physical exercise at this point. How can you ever outcompete me if I can force myself to do the things I don't want to do and you cannot? Discipline is absolutely essential for success, and you need to get very comfortable and very used to the idea of understanding that on your path to greatness, there are going to be long periods of time where you hate what you are doing, where you are dissatisfied with the actions you must undertake, where you are tired, where you are stressed. That is why it is difficult. That is why most people won't make it. If the path was easy, everybody would walk it and it would lead nowhere. 100 people start the path, 99 fall off because it is difficult, and the one person who makes it to the end gets to gold. If all 100 made it to the end and the gold was divided by 100, it wouldn't even be worth anything. The difficulty gives it value. The fact that it is difficult to do is the key component into the fact you want it in the first place. If it wasn't difficult, everyone would have it and you wouldn't want it because no one would respect it. It's supposed to be hard. Life is supposed to be hard. You're supposed to think this is terrible. You're supposed to suffer and smile through the pain regardless. Discipline is the key to success in all realms as a man. And if you lack it, you stand no chance. You can give most people a roadmap to success. You can give them a Ferrari with a full tank of gas, and a lot of people still wouldn't make the destination because they would say the drive is too far away. Quitters, they don't have the discipline. You can tell them exactly how to do it. You can give them the mechanism to get there, but they don't have the discipline to complete the drive and end up at the destination. That is the majority of Earth. This is your competition. People who, even if they are told what to do and people tell them exactly how to do it and help them do it, still quit, still fail because they lack discipline. Even me, with my monumental powers, I can't make a quitter successful. It doesn't matter how good I am. It doesn't matter how easily I make it for them to succeed. It doesn't matter how compendious and concise and powerful the real world is. It doesn't matter how much I text them and motivate them, how many emergency meetings I do to try and talk to them and hype them up, how much motivation I give them. It doesn't matter what I do. If they are a quitter, guess what they're going to do? They're going to quit. No matter how simple the map is to read, no matter how fast a Ferrari is, somewhere along the drive, the sun's going to get in their eyes, and they're going to sit there and go, I don't like this, this is hard, and they're going to quit. Quitters are the number one type of people that nobody can help. If you're a quitter, I can't help you, life can't help you, God himself cannot help a quitter. So if you lack discipline, you lack the very basic building block to any type of success which exists on the planet. By every single metric which can be measured with science, you are going to stay a loser and a failure.
If you concentrate solely on your career, you can get a long way in your career. And I would say that that's a strategy that a minority of men preferentially do. That's all they do. They work like 70, 80 hours a week. They go flat out on their career. They're staking everything on the small probability of exceptional status in a narrow domain. But it's hard on them. They don't have a life. It's very difficult for them to have a family. They don't know how to take any leisure activity. Like, they get very one-dimensional. Now, it may be that unidimensionality is the price you have to pay to be exceptional at one thing, right? Because if you're going to be something like a genius level mathematician and you want to do that or a scientist, say, it's like you're in your lab all the time, you're working 70 hours a week or 80 hours a week, you're smart, you're dedicated, you're unidimensional, and that's how you get to beat all the other people who are doing that. It's the only way. But the problem is you don't get a life. Now, if you love being a scientist and you have that kind of focus of mind, well, first of all, you're a rare person, and second, you're going to pay for it. But fine, more power to you. But it's a risky business to do that. You sacrifice a lot for it. You know, and I would say most often, if you're speaking about having a healthy life, that isn't what you do. You spread yourself out more. So, you know, you have a family, you have some things that you do outside of work that are meaningful to you and useful. You have a network of friends. Well, those 3 things alone, or 4 things alone, are plenty to keep you well oriented. And then if one of those things collapses, you know, everything doesn't go. Now, the price you pay for that is the more you strive to optimize that balance, the less likely you are to be fantastically successful at any single one of them. But you might have a very, if you consider your life as a whole, that might be a winning strategy. One of the things Carl Jung said, I really liked this. He thought that men went after perfection and women went after wholeness. There's something different at the top of the value hierarchy. So perfection would be stake it all on one thing and look for radical success. Not that all men do that, because they don't, but we're talking about extremes, at least with regards to the men that do that. The wholeness idea is more like, well, it's like I want one thing in my life to be 150%, or I want 5 things in my life to be 80%. Well, there's a lot more richness in a life where you have 5 things operating at 80%, but you're not operating at any of them at 150%. So, and I really believe this because I've watched men and women go through their careers now for a long period of time, and one of the things that, there's lots of things that produce this, but one of the things that I've noticed is that mostly women in their 30s bail out of unidimensional careers. They won't do them. They won't put in the 80 hours a week that they would have to put in order to dominate that particular area. And it isn't, the reason that they won't do it is because they decide it's not worth it. And no wonder, because why would that be worth it? You have to ask yourself that. It's like, well, you want to be an outstanding scientist. It's like, okay, really, that's what you want, because that means that's what you do, because you're competing with other people. They're smart, they're hardworking, and if you want to be at the top, you have to be smarter and work harder than any of them. And working hard means working long hours. I mean, it also means working diligently, but in the final analysis, it's also an additive issue. If I'm smart and hardworking and I can crank out for 70 hours a week, and you do it for 30, it's like, in 2 years, I'm so far ahead of you, you will never, ever catch up. So, anyways. And I think maybe part of the reason too that women are oriented that way more than men, I think there's 2 reasons. One is socioeconomic status does not make women more attractive on the mating market, but it does make men more attractive. And the second is women's time frame is compressed, right? Because guys can always say, well, I'll have kids later. And they can say that till they're like 80. Whereas women, it's like, no way, man. You got to get it together by the time you're, let's say 40, but really probably by 35, but definitely by 40, because otherwise it ain't happening. And that's bloody dreadful. One of the common routes to extreme unhappiness is to want children and not have them. I wouldn't recommend that. You see couples who are in their 30s. 1 couple in 3 over the age of 30 has fertility problems. That's defined as inability to conceive after 1 year of trying. 1 in 3. So it's worth thinking about, because people are very, very unhappy if they want to have kids and then they can't. Man, you're in the medical mill for 10 years if that's what happens to you. We've got a hypothesis that we're still working out that's supported to some degree by the relevant literature. So imagine that you're looking for a stable partner, right? So you might think, well, what do you want in a stable partner? And at least in principle, one of the things you don't want is too much mismatch between you and that person on the 5 fundamental dimensions. So for example, if you're really extroverted and you have a really introverted partner, you're going to engage in continual conflict about how much social activity the 2 of you should subject yourself to. And it's very, very difficult for people who widely differ on those dimensions to come to consensus, because it's not just a matter of opinion, right? It's really a matter of different, if you're looking at extremes, of really different types of people. And the thing about introverts is they just don't enjoy large-scale social interaction that much. One-on-one they're often fine, but in a group they don't like that, and it tires them out. Whereas a real extrovert, it's like you isolate them and they just wither on the vine, because a huge part of what actually motivates them in a positive way is tangled up with social interaction. And so if you're an agreeable person and you have a particularly disagreeable partner, you're also going to run into problems, because the agreeable person will say whatever you want whenever, and the disagreeable person will say, well, I'd like to know what the hell you want for a change, and be much more harsh and much more demanding in the situation. And the agreeable person is going to find the disagreeable person harsh and unpleasant, and the disagreeable person is going to find the agreeable person wishy-washy and unable to stand up for themselves. And again, that's actually one of the primary sources of tension between men and women, because women tend to be higher in agreeableness than men. It's about half a standard deviation, which is quite a large difference by psychological standards. And so What that means, I probably haven't got the statistic quite right. If you have a group of men and women and you pick out random pairs, the woman is going to be more agreeable than the man 60% of the time. So that's not an overwhelming proportion, but it's reliable, and it's quite large by psychological standards. So there's the problem with agreeableness. With conscientiousness, well, if you're conscientious, you're industrious and orderly. And orderly people seem to be sensitive to disgust, which is something we'll talk about in detail later. We've had a hard time specifying exactly what makes industrious people industrious, because it's hard to come up with an animal model for that sort of thing, and there's no theoretical model. But our latest idea is that, it's not my idea, it's actually the idea of my graduate student, Christine Brophy, is that industrious people find it unpleasant and unsettling to not be doing something. You need structure, you need predictability, and you need more of it than you think, just to keep you sane. Now, if you're lucky, and maybe a bit odd, you can deviate 5% from the norm, or 10% from the norm, or something like that, carefully and cautiously, as long as the rest of you is all well ordered in a normative manner. You might be able to get away with that, and you might be able to sustain it across time, and people might be able to tolerate you if you do it. Or maybe you'll get really lucky and you happen to be creative but reasonably well put together, and people will actually be happy that there's something idiosyncratic and unique about you. But even under those circumstances, mostly what you want is to have a routine that's disciplined, that's predictable, and bloody well stick to it. You're going to be way healthier and happier and saner if you do that. And then the other thing that you need, because this is one of the things the psychoanalysts got wrong, I think, is that they overestimated the degree to which sanity was a consequence of being properly structured internally, you know? Because from the psychoanalytic point of view, you're sort of an ego, and that ego is inside you. And of course, it rests on an unconscious structure, but the purpose of psychoanalysis is to sort out that unconscious structure and the ego on top of it, and to make you a fully functioning and autonomous individual. But there's a problem with that, because the reason that you're sane as a fully functional and autonomous human being isn't because you've organized your psyche, even though that's important. The reason that you're sane, if you have a well-organized unconscious and ego, is because other people can tolerate having you around for reasonably extensive periods of time, and will cuff you across the back of the head every time you do something so stupid that people will dislike you permanently if you continue. And so what people are doing to each other all the time, just non-stop, is broadcasting sanity signals back and forth, right? It's like you smile at people if they're not only behaving properly, but behaving in a way that you would like to see them continue to behave. You frown at them if they're not, you ignore them if they're not, you shun them, you roll your eyes at them, you manifest a disgust face, you don't listen to them, you interrupt them, you won't cooperate with them, you won't compete with them. It's like you're blasting signals at other people about how to regulate their behavior so frequently, well, it just makes up all of your social interaction. That's why we face each other, and we have emotional displays on our face, and we're looking at each other's eyes, and we know as much as we can about what's going on with each other, given that we don't have immediate access to the contents of their consciousness. And so partly what you're doing with your routine is establishing yourself as a credible, reliable, trustworthy, potentially interesting human being who isn't going to do anything too erratic at any moment. And everyone else is around there tapping you into shape, making sure that that's exactly what you are. And that's how you stay sane. And so what happens to people too, if they don't have a routine and they get isolated, is they start to drift. So there's this weird dynamic that's part of the existential system of ideas between human vulnerability, social judgment, both of which are major causes of suffering, and the failure of individuals to adopt the responsibility that they know they should adopt. It isn't merely that your fate depends on whether or not you get your act together and to what degree you decide that you're going to live out your own genuine being. It isn't only your fate. It's the fate of everyone that you're networked with. And so, you know, you think, well, there's 9 billion, 7 billion people in the world. We're going to peak at about 9 billion, by the way, and then it'll decline rapidly. But 7 billion people in the world, and who are you? You're just one little dust mote among that 7 billion, and so it really doesn't matter what you do or don't do, but that's simply not the case. It's the wrong model, because you're at the center of a network. You're a node in a network. Of course, that's even more true now that we have social media. You'll know 1,000 people, at least, over the course of your life. And they'll know 1,000 people each, and that puts you one person away from 1,000,000, and two persons away from 1,000,000,000. And so that's how you're connected. And the things you do, they're like dropping a stone in a pond. The ripples move outward, and they affect things in ways that you can't fully comprehend. And it means that the things that you do and that you don't do are far more important than you think. And so if you act that way, of course, the terror of realizing that is that it actually starts to matter what you do. And you might say, well, that's better than living a meaningless existence. It's better for it to matter. But I mean, if you really asked yourself, would you be so sure if you had the choice? I can live with no responsibility whatsoever. The price I pay is that nothing matters. Or I can reverse it and everything matters. But I have to take the responsibility that's associated with that. It's not so obvious to me that people would take the meaningful path. You know, when you say, well, nihilists suffer dreadfully because there's no meaning in their life and they still suffer. Yeah, but the advantage is they have no responsibility. So that's the payoff, and I actually think that's the motivation. Say, well, I can't help being nihilistic. All my belief systems have collapsed. It's like, yeah, maybe. Maybe you've just allowed them to collapse because it's a hell of a lot easier than acting them out. And the price you pay is some meaningless suffering, but you can always whine about that and people will feel sorry for you, and you have the option of taking the pathway of the martyr, so that's a pretty good deal, all things considered, especially when the alternative is to bear your burden properly and to live forthrightly in the world. Well, what Solzhenitsyn figured out, and so many people in the 20th century, it's not just him, even though he's the best example, is that if you live a pathological life, you pathologize your society. And if enough people do that, then it's hell. Really, really. And you can read the Gulag Archipelago if you have the fortitude to do that, and you'll see exactly what hell is like. And then you can decide if that's a place you'd like to visit, or even more importantly, if it's a place you'd like to visit and take all your family and friends, because that's what happened in the 20th century. I wouldn't consider myself either naive or particularly optimistic person. I don't think I'm either of those. But this isn't actually an idea. This is one of the only ideas that I've ever found that I really believe to be rock solid. I actually think that it's true. And it's very optimistic because it says you can use your sense of meaning to calibrate your progress through life. But there's rules. You have to aim at the highest possible good that you can conceive. Now, and that's subject to update, because what the hell do you know? But you start by aiming at the star you can see rather than the dimmer one that you can't yet perceive. And then you decide that you're going to do that honestly, right? That's a big decision. So the first decision, I think, in some sense, is a decision of love. You're going to decide that being is worthwhile and that you're going to work for its betterment. And that's a decision that's based on love. And the second decision is based on truth. Having made that decision, you're going to play a straight game. Having made those two decisions, I think that you can allow your sense of meaning to calibrate your pathway. And then what's so interesting is that you hit a state that's as close to paradisal as you're going to hit right away, because being engaged like that, it's better to be engaged in the solution of a complex problem than not to have a problem at all. And that's no different than saying it's better for there to be being than non-being, because being is a problem. And so if you want to have no problems, then you have no being. And you could say, well, being is so miserable that maybe that's the route we should take. And fair enough, but maybe you can have your cake and eat it too. You can have the damn problem. It can be a problem worth solving, and you can be so engaged in solving the problem that it justifies the fact that the problem exists. And then you get to have the problem and the solution at the same time, and maybe that's better than not having the problem at all. And I believe that, because one of the things I have seen, and I've seen this being so interesting when I've been lecturing to people, especially more recently, and this has also manifested itself on YouTube. I'm talking to people a lot about responsibility, and it's young men in particular that seem to be responding to that. And I think that's partly because I think that young women, in some sense, have their responsibility map already laid out for them. It's also less voluntary in some sense for women, because they have more complicated problems to solve in the first part of their life, right? Because they have to get the family problem solved. But whatever. I've been talking in a very delineated manner about responsibility, which is a strange thing to sell to people, but responsibility is what gives your life meaning. And so then you might say, well, then take on ultimate responsibility. And what happens? You have an ultimately meaningful life. And then you might say, well, if your life is ultimately meaningful, it doesn't matter if it's punctuated by tragedy or even predicated on tragedy. It's worth it. And I think that's true. And everything I've seen indicates to me that's true. Every time I get my clients to take on more responsibility, you know, and it isn't an injunction. You're a bad person, you should take on responsibility. It has nothing to do with that. You can define the damn responsibility. It isn't something that someone else should impose on you. It's not a matter of doing what you should do in some abstract manner. It's not that. It's the choice of what game you're going to play. And you know, you can play the game of the seeker, I would say, and if you play that game, then everyone wins. And it's the best game you can play. And so the answer, in some sense, to the tragedy of life, to the catastrophe of life, to the fall, is to adopt the responsibility of mortality that goes along with that, and to play that game maximally. And paradoxically, it's in the willingness to do that that the solution emerges. And I don't, you know, I have done my best with every single thing I've talked to you guys about. I have done my best to do what Dostoevsky does in his novels, which is I make a proposition and then I spend months or years trying to figure out if I can take the bloody thing apart, if there's something wrong with it, because I want to find out. I want to hit it with a hammer and see if it breaks. And what I've been trying to do is to tell you all the things that I've gathered, let's say, or laid out or articulated or discovered over the last 30 years that I have not been able to break with the biggest hammer that I could take to them. And I guess that's the fundamental one, is that I believe that the idea that lurks in these images, derived from very different cultures, it's the same idea. Life is suffering. Right. Indisputable. What do you do about that? You voluntarily accept it and then strive to overcome the suffering that's a consequence of that. And you do that for you, and you do that in a way that makes it better for other people. And then that works. And one question might be, well, how well does it work? And the answer is, the only way that you can find out is by trying it. That's it. That's the existential element of it. The proof is to be derived by the incarnation of the attitude in your own life. No one can tell you how it will work for you. It's the thing that your destiny is to discover that. And you have to make the decisions to begin with. It's like, because you can't do this without commitment. You have to commit to it first. That's the act of faith that Kierkegaard was so insistent upon. You have to say, I'm going to act as if being is good. I'm going to act as if truth is the pathway to enlightenment. I'm going to act as if I should pursue the deepest meaning possible in my life. And there's reasons to do none of those. They're real reasons. So it's really a decision. But you can't find out what the consequence of the decision is unless you make the decision. I think the same thing happens when you get married, by the way. So if you think you might leave, you're not married. And then you think, well, the marriage didn't succeed. It's like, well, maybe you were never married. Because the rule is, you don't get to leave. And there's a reason for that rule. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't situations where there should be exceptions made for that. That's not the point. The point is that there's some games you don't get to play unless you're all in. And the other thing that's so interesting about being alive is that you're all in. No matter what you do, you're all in. This is going to kill you. So I think you might as well play the most magnificent game you can while you're waiting. Because do you have anything better to do? Really? Why not pick the best thing possible that you could do? Why not do that? Maybe you could justify your wretched existence to yourself that way. I think you could. That's what it looks like. You know, people find such meaning in the responsibilities they adopt, it stops making them ask questions about what life is for. If you have a newborn child, for example, like, unless you're really in a bad way, psychotically depressed, or maybe your personality really needs some retooling, you stop thinking about anything but ensuring that that baby is doing well. And if someone comes along and asks you an existential question about your commitment to that, the right response is, why are you asking me such stupid questions when this is manifesting itself right in front of your eyes? Like, how blind can you be? That isn't a time for questions about the meaning of life. The answer is right in front of you. And if you can't see it, it's not because life has no meaning, it's because you're blind. I mean, that's what the image of the Virgin Mother and the child is all about. It's like, what's the answer to the meaning of life? Here's an answer. It's like, well, I'm going to criticize that. Well, go right ahead. You know, it's like what you're like a what do you call that? A termite gnawing on a temple. There's no utility in that sort of criticism. It's blindness. And it's the same thing with regards to the path of the hero. It's like it glistens in front of you and you can criticize it. It's like, fine. Put the cart before the horse and see how far you get. So I thought, to bring full closure to the class, I was trying to solve this terrible puzzle that confronted me and many other people about how it was that human beings got themselves in such a tangle about what they believed. Such a tangle that we were pointing the ultimate weapons of destruction at one another, which, by the way, we are still doing. And I thought, okay, well, I understand that. We need our belief systems. They orient us. And that means there will be conflict between belief systems, and that can be a catastrophe. And that's being played out everywhere, again, in very many ways. What's the solution to that? Well, one possibility is there's no solution. It's just mayhem all the way around. Could be the case. But it seemed to me, as I delved into it, that the proper solution to that was to live properly as an individual, because you're more powerful than you think. Way more powerful than you think. I mean, God only knows what you are in the final analysis. You're blind to your own weaknesses, but you're also blind to your own strengths. And so then I think, well, if you got your act together, it'd be better for you, and instantly it would be better for your family, assuming they wanted you to get your act together, and not everyone does, and then it would be better for the community. It's like, how far could you take that? If you stopped wasting time, and if you stopped lying, and if you oriented yourself to the highest possible good that you could conceive of, and you committed to that, how much good could you do? Well, I would say, why don't you find out? So that's what I think you should do. You should find out. You don't have anything better to do. And there's nothing in it, as far as I've been able to tell, there's nothing in it but good. So maybe you could sort yourself out so that you wanted nothing but the good. And then maybe you could help make that manifest in the world. And maybe we wouldn't have all these terrible problems then. At least we'd have fewer of them, and that would be a start. So it's the answer to the problem of humanity is the integrity of the individual. That's the answer. So, and states that are predicated on that realization are healthy. So, and states that aren't are doomed to stagnation and catastrophic collapse. And personalities that are predicated on self-tyranny and the tyranny of others are doomed to collapse. So, and then you think, well, what's the barrier? And the barrier is, are you willing to accept the responsibility? And part of the answer to that is, reduce the damn responsibility until it's tolerable. You don't have to fix everything at once. You could just start by fixing the things that you could fix. Or you could even do it more. You could do it with even less self-sacrifice. You could start by fixing only the things that you want to fix. God, you can get a massive way that way. So do it. See what happens. That's what you should have been taught in university right from the beginning. It's like, aim at the highest good. Tool yourself into something that can attain it. And go out there and manifest it in the world. And everything that comes your way will be a blessing. And so all you have to do is give up your resentment and your hatred. I know that's a hard thing to give up because you have plenty of reason for it. that's probably a good place to stop. So it was a pleasure.
There's a study I read about stress, and it was saying that stress has a placebo effect attached to it, because the placebo effect is extremely powerful. So they found some of the most stressed people in the world, and they split them into two groups, and they're all equally stressed. They all have a bunch of cortisol in their blood.
Yeah.
The people who believed that stress was bad for you and that stress can hurt you, and they believed those media articles, were dying earlier. They were having heart attacks and having stress-related illnesses. The people who believe the opposite, who just said stress is part of being successful, I like stress. When I feel stressed, I do my best. It makes me anxious. It turns my brain on. I like being stressed. Lived longer than average.
Yeah.
The point is, the same drug, how you look at it and how your body anticipates it, how you feel about it, affects the real world results. I say this all the time. I say the best things that ever happened to me are the worst things that ever happened to me. All the trauma and I've been through in my life are the best things that ever happened to me, because as a man, if you've not had a difficult life, you cannot be good at being a man. Being a good man and being good at being a man, they're two slightly different things. But to be good at being a man, you need to have been through so much shit that when the Matrix deletes your entire life from the internet and starts lying about you at mass, and people start doing protests wanting you fucking hung, and they're looking for your family members, and reporters start calling every ex-girlfriend you've ever had, trying to convince them and bribe them to lie, to come out and say you're something you're not, when they're genuinely out to put you in jail, that you can sit there and be focused and stoic enough to go, you know what? Okay, what's the chessboard? What's going to happen? Who's trying to shoot me right now? Nobody. Okay, so it's better than it was a couple years ago. Okay, so X, Y, Z, and plan through it, right? You're never going to be capable as a man if you've not had trauma. The best men ever have had trauma. If you call a police officer, you need a brave police officer. He ain't going to be brave unless he's been through. He's not going to be brave unless he's been through shit. So we also, as a society, sit and look at men and go, well, there's two kinds of society. There's the Matrix society, but the true society, the true women with a brain. I want a man who's strong, who's supportive, who's intelligent, who financially provides, etc. Then you're going to want a man to some degree who's been through some shit. Yeah. And a man who's internalized it and used it as a weapon. And this is what I say to people. People email me their long lists of all the bad things that happened to them, and I reply, fantastic. You are so lucky. You have all the building blocks to become the exact kind of man you want to be. If none of this shit happened to you, when something else bad happens to you later, you wouldn't be able to deal with it. Fantastic. And he goes, no, but this. He replied again with more excuses and said, why are you making excuses? I just told you what happened to you is a good thing. You need to reframe your mind. Bad things happened to Batman. They killed his parents. Do you understand? That's why he's Batman. You've just told me you have the building blocks to become you might become top G when I retire. Fantastic. What are you complaining about? He goes, well, what do I do? I said, you need to work. Take all that trauma. If you're truly heartbroken, my friend, and we've all been there as men, if you're truly heartbroken, you can't sleep. That means you're going to get in fantastic shape. You better hit the gym. You have nothing else to do. Stop watching YouTube. Stop emailing me. I want pictures of you in the gym. Get to fucking work. Heartbreak's a fantastic motivator, as is depression, as is sadness. Great. Look at what's pissing you off and make sure it never happens again. If you were jacked and rich as fuck, she probably wouldn't have left your ass. So get your shit together. I don't think motivation is a real thing. I don't believe in motivation as a concept. I think discipline is real, and I also think discontentment is real. And I don't think it's possible for anybody to stay in a scenario where they're truly uncomfortable. If you fall asleep on your arm and your arm really starts to hurt, even in the deepest sleep, you're going to wake up and move your arm. If you sit there and your life has been in a rut for 7 years, you are semi-comfortable in that rut. Sure, there's days you're pissed off. Sure, you're semi-annoyed by it. But there's also days where you just play video games, eat pizza, and you're kind of cool with it, and it's no big deal. If you were truly unhappy and uncomfortable and discontent with your scenario, you wouldn't be in it. So I don't believe there's anybody who's truly, when I was broke, I couldn't sleep. Yeah. I'm not saying that, please understand me. When I was broke, I couldn't sleep. I'd be trying to go to bed thinking, how the fuck these people have Ferraris? I want a Ferrari. I couldn't sleep.
If I had to open a coffee shop, if I sit in a coffee shop, right? If I sit in Starbucks, the whole time I'm in there, not only am I thinking about how they got the money from me and how much I spent, I'm thinking about how I could outcompete them. I'd sit there and go, okay, cool. I'm in Starbucks. I spent £5.68. I got a latte and I got a donut, and I'm sitting here. And that business place, that commercial property right across the street is available for lease. How could I outcompete this coffee shop, which just took my money? What's the profit margin on this £5.68? How much did this cost them? The coffee, pennies. Donut, 30p maybe, right? How much is the staff? They pay the staff minimum wage, £8 an hour. So I've already paid half. I've already paid 30 minutes work from that brokey. The wage, she's there for another 30 minutes for free, right? How much is the rent? How much is the business rates? If I had to open up there, how would I attract people to come into my shop as opposed to their shop? They got a big brand name. I'm brand new. Okay, well, the working here is ugly. My one's going to be hot. Boom, that's the beginning. Next thing, do they have any signage outside? No, I'm gonna try and put some signage outside. Do they have parking? No, I need parking. But you need to start thinking about how you can convince people to give you their money as opposed to giving it to the places they already give it.
Different analytics.
And once you do that, people say, I can't think of how to make money. If you start doing that for a year and just keep a notepad, you'll have 100 ideas of how to make money. You'll sit there and go, there's a place here that's doing this and we could do it better this way. This place online is doing this, we can do it better this way. And then to get them all done, what do you need? Network. You need people. It's all about people. Then you need to either go in the war room if you want to join, or have your people around you and say, okay, we can make money with this. Who's going to do it? Who's not lazy? Who's getting up at 4 a.m. tomorrow? Boom, let's get it done. So there's unlimited ways to make money, but most people go through life and their money is taken from them and they don't even identify how they got tricked out of it.
They're just happy with it.
Yeah, they just have, how did I spend 16 grand in Cirque last night? Oh, because my ass got drunk. How'd they get me drunk? Well, because the guy, when I first bought the first bottle of champagne, was there on the table, pouring, putting it in my hand, got me drunk, then I spent 16 grand on bottles. That's how they got my money. So if I open a club, I need to make sure when people first come in, they get hammered. Nobody thinks about it that way. Nobody thinks, how did they get that out of me? Right? Why am I spending $2,000 for dinner in Novikov? Is it the food or is it the fact that I'm in Novikov and tag myself in Novikov? You have to identify how you're getting famoosed, how you're getting finessed. That's how you do it. But most people just walk through life getting finessed left, right, and center, giving all their money up. And they're like, oh, how did that happen?
You got to learn to finesse other people.
Yeah, but it's not finessing in a negative way.
It's in a good way.
It's a good way. You have to take money from other people. That's the only way you're going to make money.
Yeah.
You have to take it. There's a pimp, and he said a really intelligent line. He said, business is just other people's money. That's all business is. I want to start a business. So you want other people's money. That's what you want. So how are they going to give it to you? You have to think about it. Nobody thinks about it. And the easiest way to think about it is to think how you're giving yours away. That's a mental model you should adopt.
Yeah. And
you'll end up with loads of business ideas. Business ideas are everywhere. It's just execution, which is difficult.
Your ability to speak freely is directly correlated to your insignificance. When nobody listens to you, you can say what you want. If you get a platform and start talking, you will learn very quickly how you're not allowed to say what you want because people are listening. You're free to talk in an empty room. You're not free to talk to millions of people who are paying attention to you. So what we have now in the West is a society which is only linked and only bound by this false idea of freedom.
So it's really difficult.
There's always people out there who are doing far better than you on pretty much anything you want to imagine. And if all you're doing is seeing yourself in their reflected light, let's say, then it's going to be pretty damn dismal. But it's not a good comparison because, well, first of all, there's danger in just comparing yourself to others, period, because they're not you. And God only knows what struggles they had to undertake to get to where they were, or what burdens they're currently carrying that you're not aware of. But you can certainly contrast yourself with yourself. And that's a lot better. It is the only way. Well, it's also the only way of really measuring anything approximating proper improvement. You can actually tell when you're a little better than you were yesterday.
Right.
And you can actually do that. That's another thing that's so interesting about it, is that you can actually make yourself a little better in some way, pretty much, well, I don't know if it's at every moment, but you can certainly do it every day. You're quite different from other people, and you shouldn't be comparing yourself to them because they're not like you. You know, they don't have your family. They don't have your temperament. They don't have your troubles. They don't have your abilities. The only person that has those is you. Compare yourself to who you were yesterday and not to who someone else is today. And see, that's a game you can win. Be careful who you share good news with, because you want to share good news with people who are going to be genuinely happy for you, and that's one way that you can identify those people who are really on your side. Be careful who you share bad news with, because that's equally tricky. You know, you want someone who will listen to you when you're having trouble and allow you your grief, especially if it's a consequence of something tragic, and who won't try to one-up you, you know, because often when you're talking to people, they'll be thinking about what they have to say that's worse, and that's not helpful if you need a listening ear. Make one room in your house as beautiful as possible. I talked a lot already about the necessity of cleaning your room, which is, you know, in some sense a foolish piece of advice because it seems so obvious, but it's not obvious at all. And you'll find if you try it, especially if you're in a household that's not very functional, that you'll encounter obstacles that you couldn't imagine existed while you're trying to put your life in order. And you can take your surroundings beyond order and move towards beauty, and that's unbelievably useful. One of the things that I've been there's lots of different ways to interpret the world, and you can maybe even make a case that there's an endless number of ways to interpret the world. And the problem with that is that it kind of disorients you in terms of what you should be doing. But just because there's a very large number of ways to interpret the world doesn't mean there's a very large number of productive, meaningful, and sustainable ways to interpret the world. And one of the things you do have to do is figure out how you can conduct yourself today so that you don't upset the apple cart in a week or a month or a year. And so, what you do in some sense psychologically is you admit to yourself that your current frame of reference is faulty. And then you start opening the door to a different kind of thinking, which is more creative thinking. It's more lateral thinking. Saying, well, I'm wrong, but that's not necessarily a problem because I could be right if I thought some other way. Well, that's great. Often it works.
Yeah.
And there's almost no end to the utility of trying to figure out which ways that you're wrong.
Yeah.
Because there's lots of them. And every time you discover one, then you don't have to be quite so wrong anymore. That's a really good deal.
Yeah.
It's from the uphill climb that we derive our value, and I mean this technically. So almost all the positive emotion we feel, especially the emotion that fills us with enthusiasm, and that's experienced in relationship to a goal. And so in some sense, you want a goal that you can never attain. So you can always move closer to the goal that recedes as you move towards it. You think, well, that's frustrating. It's like Sisyphus pushing the rock uphill. But it's not, because as you pursue that goal, you put yourself together and your life does get better and richer and more abundant. And that's why the highest levels of virtue and goal are in some sense transcendent. You want them to be above everything you're doing so you can continually move towards something that's more sublime and better. That's what you are. You're here to live, not to sleep. And the problem with the vision of Mai Tais on the beach is that, well, first of all, that's a vision of drug-induced unconsciousness. Second, it's only going to work for about a week. Third, you're going to be a laughingstock in a month and depressed and aimless and goalless. You want a horizon of ever expanding possibility. And so it does happen to people because they've staked their soul on the attainment of an instrumental goal. And it can be a pretty high order goal, but then you think, now I'm there, now what? Well, the answer can't be, well, I'm going to live in the lap of luxury and never have to leave what do you want to be, a giant infant with a gold bottle? You never have to do anything but lay in your back and suck. It's like, you see the problem with that as a conceptualization. It's no, you want to be like an active warrior moving uphill with your sword in hand. And that's dynamic, that's exciting. Lay a disciplinary structure on yourself. Get the chaos in check. And then you can move towards a state that's freer. It's discipline first. Like, look, if you're going to become a concert pianist, there's going to be several thousand hours of extraordinarily disciplined practice. That's the imposition of order on your potential, let's say. But what comes out of that is a much grander freedom. And so in virtually every freedom that you have in life that's true freedom is purchased at the price of discipline. But it's not some casual self-help doctrine. It's that if you don't organize yourself properly, you'll pay for it, and in a big way, and so will the people around you. And I would say, start where you can start. If something announces itself to you as in need of repair, that you could repair, then hey, fix it. You fix 100 things like that, your life will be a lot different. I often tell people too, fix the things you repeat every day, because people tend to think of those as trivial. You get up, you brush your teeth, you have your breakfast, you have your routines that you go through every day. Well, those probably constitute 50% of your life. And people think, well, they're mundane, I don't need to pay attention to them. It's like, no, that's exactly wrong. The things you do every day, those are the most important things you do, hands down. People are afraid of the truth because often if you reveal it, it causes conflict in the moment. Telling the truth is definitely an adventure. Seeking for sure, but also telling. Another way of going about it is to just say what you think and see what happens. That's an adventure, because you don't know what the outcome is going to be. So look, there's this old idea that it's necessary to have faith in the truth. And so here's a way of thinking about that. Someone asks you a question and you might think, well, here's the outcome I want, and so here's how I'm going to answer that question. So that's one way of approaching it. But another way of approaching it is, you ask me a question, I'm going to think about the answer, and I'm just going to tell you what I think. And it doesn't matter what the outcome is, because I'm willing to see what the outcome will be, predicated on the idea that there isn't a better outcome than the one that truth produces. Even if it's harsh and terrible in the short term, and sometimes it is, it's like there isn't a better way of doing it. Now, you might say, well, how do you know that? And the answer is, well, I don't know that. That's why it's an article of faith, because I believe, and I believe this deeply, the being that you produce as a consequence of telling the truth is good, by definition, even though it's harsh and often uncomfortable, because you get in trouble. One of the things that I've really learned recently, or learned to articulate better, is that there's a very tight relationship between aspiration and responsibility. The first question might be, do you need to aspire to something? And the answer is, well, yes, because you have to do something. If you just sit there, you'll die. You can't just sit there. You have to go act out in the world. Okay, so act towards what? Well, that's whatever your aspiration is. You have to have an aim. Okay, well, what should the aim be? Well, it should be something worth doing, let's say. Why do something that you don't feel is worth doing? What do you think's worth doing? Well, if you watch other people and you judge when they're doing something worthwhile, you usually judge them positively if you see that they're taking responsibility, at least for themselves. What, do you want to be completely useless so other people have to take care of you? That's pretty pathetic. And maybe you could get your act together so you're taking care of yourself and your family. And maybe you could even do better than that and take care of yourself and your family and your community. Well, good for you. That's responsibility, and that's an aim. Well, here's one of the things that's cool about that, is that your life doesn't have meaning without aspiration or an aim. Okay, so you need a hierarchy of values. There's got to be something at the top. It's got to be something important. If you don't have that, your life doesn't have any meaning. So if you criticize the hierarchy, or even the idea of hierarchy, you destroy the idea of aspiration, and then people have nothing. Well, that's not helpful. People are built for a struggle, and they're built for a weight, and you want to take on a heavy burden voluntarily. See if you can put yourself together. See what you can do out in the world while you're waiting to die. It's an all-in game. It better be worthwhile. The great people I know are brutally truthful to themselves and other people, and they have insanely adventurous lives. Get rid of everything you say that you only say to impress other people, and just see if you can say what you believe to be true. That's an adventure. That's the thing about the truth, you know? Well, you got to ask yourself, if you're not speaking the truth, who is it that's talking? If you're saying something that you do not believe to be true, it's not you talking. It's something else. It might be the part of you that wants to manipulate the other person into delivering what you think you want from them. Well, what is that spirit of manipulation that you've allowed to possess you? It's not you. Let's say you decide to live your whole life in that instrumental manner. You're going to craft your words like the student who says, well, I'm going to write what the professor wants to hear so I get the grade. It's like, well, you just turn yourself into that. Well, who is it that's doing that manipulating? It's not you, because those aren't your words. So even if you get the grade, it's not you that got the grade. It's the false you. It's the manipulative you. So you do that your whole life. You don't have your life. And then you think, well, God, that was a miserable life. I manipulated everybody. They were so damn stupid. They were sucked in by it. They're all contemptible. Everyone does it, you know, which they don't, by the way. And so that's a pathway to bitterness. Partly because if you're a manipulator and you use your language falsely, you don't live your own life. You live the life of whatever possesses you when you think it's you manipulating. And so you live the life of the spirit of manipulation. You know, maybe you're in California, see someone speeding down the road in a convertible Porsche, and you think, oh man, what a lucky bastard. And the truth of the matter is that he's thinking about wrapping his expensive sports car around the next cement pillar that he comes close to. You know, you can't tell, and people have hard lives, and even people who are comparatively fortunate have hard lives. And the ideal that you're observing that makes you jealous and resentful is in large part an illusion that's created by your own mind. You have to be careful of what you're jealous of, because you don't really know what it is. And then the other thing that's kind of useful is to understand you're quite different from other people, and you shouldn't be comparing yourself to them because they're not like you. They don't have your family. They don't have your temperament. They don't have your troubles. They don't have your abilities. The only person that has those is you. If you write a book, which is virtually impossible, and then get a publisher, which is virtually impossible, you probably have a rejection rate of 99%. So then if you do manage to publish the book with a reasonable publisher, which you won't because it's impossible, then you get 8% royalties. That's it. So 92% of your labor goes to the sales, marketing, and distribution end of things. And so it's very, very difficult to generate capital as an entrepreneur. And there's innumerable impediments. One of the things that people do, and this is something for those of you who might be entrepreneurially minded, here's another thing that you have to understand, is that you can't really create a product and then launch it. Because first of all, you don't know how to do that. You might know how to create the product, but you do not know how to market or sell it. You don't know how to advertise it. You don't know how to communicate about it. You don't know how to ship it. Like, there's all sorts of things you just don't know. But worse is you don't know if people will use it. And so what companies do that roll out new products on a relatively continual basis do is they don't develop the product and then go sell it. They continually communicate with their customers about what product the customer is willing to buy next, and then they develop that. And so you have to have your market identified, and then you have to be in continual communication with the market while you develop the product. It's not, I build a better mousetrap and the world comes, marching to my door. That isn't how it works. Is that you got to find out if someone wants to buy your stupid thing. And then the next thing is that even if you have a great thing, you're going to go talk to people and they have 50 great things that they might buy. And they're all great, but they're not going to buy all 50. They might buy one, maybe, and maybe they'll buy it this week, but probably they'll buy it in 6 months. And they're not going to buy any of them, no matter how great, unless they're on fire and you're selling water. Because they're so busy already, right? They're so overwhelmed and preoccupied by their jobs that if you come in and you say, well, here, this is going to increase your efficiency by 20%, and here's the 3 weeks you'd have to spend doing that, and then the payoff would come in the next years, they'll say, yeah, well, I'll do that as soon as I have time. And as soon as I have time is never. So if they're on fire and you have water, you can sell it to them. But that's all, because otherwise it's a no-go. So those are all things that are worthwhile knowing, because they're very hard to learn. And very comically, I mean, if you would have told me when I first started developing these tests that one of the reasons corporations wouldn't buy them was because they worked, that I would have just thought, really? I mean, come on, really? That's really the reason? It's like, yeah, that's the reason. God. So very, very, very problematic. And then they already have their processes in place and they're entrenched. And then the next problem is, you haven't got any customers. I think I told you that before. You don't have any customers and you show them the statistics, but they can't understand the statistics. And they also have 200 other people selling them things, and 50 of them are crooks. So they're just lying about what they're doing, and they can't tell the difference between the liars and the people who are telling the truth. And so they can't understand the statistics for themselves, and they can't verify them anyways. So what they ask you is, who else is using it? And if the answer is, well, everybody, then you don't even have to do the sale because you're already rich. And if the answer is nobody, then they're going to say, well, why is nobody using this? You say, well, it's the hottest thing that's come along. And they think, well, I'm not going to be the sucker who gets painted, red and fired because this failed. That they do not think this might make me succeed. People do not care about whether or not they succeed. They care about whether or not they fail. And so that's another thing, is that if you're marketing something and you can say, this will stop you from being identified as a failure, then people might be happy about that. But if you say, this will really help you succeed, it's like, yeah, no, I don't want to succeed. I just don't want to fail. I don't want to succeed. I just want to be invisible and be left alone. And if you're looking for people's fundamental motivation, that's it. It's they want to be invisible and they want to be left alone. I tell you the zebra story? Any of you know that story? Okay, I'll tell you this zebra story. Stop me if I've told it to you before. This tells you everything you need to know about human beings. So it's worth knowing. Okay, so zebras have stripes. And people say, well, that's for camouflage. And then you think about that for 2 seconds and you think, that's a really stupid theory, because lions are camouflaged and they're like golden like the grass. And zebras are black and white, so you can see a zebra 5 miles away. It's like, there's a zebra, it's black and white. So the whole camouflage thing, that's just not working out so well as a hypothesis. Okay, so biologists go and they decide to take a look at some zebras. And so they're looking at a zebra on the herd, because there's no zebra, right? Just like there's no fish. There are schools of fish and there are herds of zebras. There isn't a fish. This is why I think the cod aren't coming back. There are no cod. There are massive 100-mile long schools of cod, 10 stories deep, 20 million years old. You wipe out the school, you don't just get to throw a cod in the water and say, well, you know, off you go. It's like, well, where's my city? It's like launching you in the middle of a field. It's like, well, go out there and reproduce. It's like, no, that's not going to happen, you know? So without the school, there's no cod, and you can't just introduce a whole school of cod because you don't have a whole school of cod. So, you know, maybe the cod are never coming back. And zebras are the same thing. There's not a zebra. There's zebras. And so you're looking at the zebras, trying to study a zebra, and you look at the zebra and you make some notes and you look up and you think, oh, Christ, which zebra was I looking at? And the answer to that is you don't know, because the camouflage is against the herd. And the black and white stripes. There's a variety of reasons for the stripes. Flies also seem not to like the stripes, but you know, usually things evolve for multiple reasons. But anyways, it's very difficult to parse out a zebra against the herd. You look down, you look up, it's like, uh-oh, all those damn zebras look the same. Yes, the camouflage is effective, but it's against the herd. All right, so then you think, well, we better identify a zebra so we can see what he's up to. So then you take your Jeep, and a can of red paint and a stick with a rag on the end of it, and you drive up to the zebras and you paint their haunch red a little bit, put a nice red dot on their haunch, or maybe clip their ear with a cattle clip. And then you stand back and you think, hey, I'm pretty smart, now I'm going to watch that zebra. So what do you think happens to the zebra? The lions kill it. Right, because lions, they're smart, right? Hunting animals are smart. But they have to identify a zebra before they can organize their hunt. They can't just hunt the whole herd. They have to pick out a zebra. And so maybe it's like a zebra that's got a sore hip or something. And so you think, well, nature's kind. It just takes the weak. It's no, zebra or lions like really healthy, delicious zebras. But they look like all the other healthy, delicious zebras, so they can't get a bead on them. But if they're small and just born, or if they're limping, or there's something that identifies them, then the lions can pick them out. And then they do pick them out. And so the rule for human beings is keep your damn stripes on so the lions don't get you. And I'm telling you, man, if you want to remember one thing from my class about human motivation, that's a good thing to learn. People camouflage themselves against the herd, and they like to be in the middle of the herd, which is what fish do, by the way. If you have a big school of fish, the smart, healthy, large fish are in the middle of the school. Because you know what you call fish on the outside of the school? Bait. Right. So that's what people are doing. They're trying to move into the middle of the herd all the time. And the herd moves around, or the school moves around, and people are going, well, I'm in the middle. I'm staying in the middle here. So I've got this protective ring of people around me so the predators don't pick me out and do me in. So, okay, so that's part of the reason why I said, well, you can't sell something to someone for success, because you're thinking, well, people are aiming at success. Don't be thinking that. It's not by any means necessarily true. Trait neuroticism is a powerful motivator. And trait neuroticism is, let's not be too threatened or hurt, right? That's the negative emotion system. And the negative emotion system is a killer source of motivation. You also see that there are scales of well-being that have been designed, mostly by social psychologists, which means they're very bad scales most of the time, because their psychometric capacity is absurdly low, generally speaking. So what you find with scales of well-being, sometimes they're talked about as scales of happiness even, is that people aren't after happiness, they're after not hurting. It's not, so they don't want to be extroverted and enthusiastic, right? And bubbly and full of smiles and laughter. That isn't what they mean by I want to be happy. What they mean is I don't want to be anxious or in pain. And so well-being scales tend to be something like emotional stability plus extroversion. But the big loading is on emotional stability, the reverse of neuroticism. You want to avoid suffering. You don't want to be happy. You want to avoid suffering. And one way to avoid suffering is not to let the lions gnaw on you. And one way of doing that is to stay in the middle of the damn herd. And so, like, I'm not being a smart aleck about this. I understand why people do that. There's real danger to being visible. There's real danger in being visible. Now, you might be successful if you're visible, but you also might be dead. Is there a purpose to our life? And, well, that's a hard question. And then, if there is a purpose, well, how is it expressed? And then, if there is a purpose and our lives are truncated, as they are by death, then how can that purpose have significance? And those are hard questions, but Socrates' experience seemed to be that he had lived enough in his life so that when push came to shove, which it certainly did, he was able to gracefully let it go. And you know, he attested to that with his death. And that's fairly convincing, you know, I mean, that's a fairly convincing argument. And it's one that I find, well, it's hard to tell if I find it exactly credible, but I don't find it incredible. I mean, I certainly have noticed that as I've got older and have done things, what would you say, accomplished isn't exactly the right word. I've participated in many things that I'm pleased to have participated in them, but wouldn't necessarily go back and participate in them again. It's sort of as if when you do something and you finish it, it's as if it's done. You don't have to do it again. And maybe it's possible, who knows, that if you finish your life, whatever that might mean, if you exhaust your life, then that's enough life, you know, that you've had enough. And I mean, that doesn't mean that I try not to keep myself healthy and that I want to die tomorrow. It doesn't mean any of that. I'm trying to stick around as long as I can, but there's still that curiosity about the relationship between life and mortality, and the possibility that a life well lived exhausts itself in some fundamental sense, so that you can be satisfied, let's say, with what you were. There is some psychological evidence that bears on this. If you ask people what they regret, especially as they get older, what they generally report is things not done. So they don't regret so much mistakes they've made, although of course people obviously regret mistakes they've made as well. So they don't exactly regret sins of commission, right? Errors that they've actively made. They torment themselves for opportunities that had presented themselves that they did not, let's say, exploit or engage in. And I think that's worth thinking about too, because one thing that I have become convinced about with regards to human consciousness, which I think is equivalent to the spark of divinity in some sense that our fundamental stories insist has been placed within us, is that human consciousness is that faculty that confronts potential itself. I think there's good neurological evidence for this, by the way, for those of you who are scientifically minded, because we build circuits within us for habitual action that we've practiced many times that seem to run in a very deterministic fashion. And we are a strange combination of deterministic and non-deterministic as far as I can tell. But what our consciousness seems to be for is to encounter those things that we have not yet encountered. And those things that we have not yet encountered seem to me to be those things that have not yet been brought into being. And so you could say that what our consciousness is for the encounter with potential. You know, that our consciousness is it's not for the past, it's not even for the present. It's to transform the future into the present. And really that's what our consciousness does. And when you wake up in the morning, you have a new day ahead of you, and the day could take you in very many directions. And the weeks and the years, all of that can take you in very many directions. And you have some apprehension about what those directions might be. You have some apprehension about what role your choices might make in transforming that potential into one form of actuality or another. I mean, you certainly know that there are dreadful mistakes that you might be very tempted to make that would produce all manner of hell around you and still be tempted to do it. It seems like it's sitting there right in front of you as a possibility. You also know that, you could haul yourself up out of bed and attend to your duties and do the sorts of things that you're supposed to and set a few things right that day and that week, and that likely things would at least not be worse and they would probably be better. And I do believe that I don't understand how this can be the case. I don't understand how it is that consciousness can function in that way, because I think to understand that, we would have to understand what it means for the future to be only potential rather than actuality, and who the hell understands that? I mean, no one. And then we'd have to understand how it is that our conscious choices and our conscious ethical choices transform that potentiality into actuality, into reality, into the present and the past. And we certainly act as if we believe that that's what we do. We upbraid ourselves. For example, when we do a bad job of it, we're upset with our children and those we love if we don't believe that they're living up to their potential. We're guilty and ashamed when we make choices that we feel are inappropriate. We understand to some degree that the manner in which time lays itself out has something to do with the ethics of our choice. And again, I would say that's a very deep idea. I think it's the most true idea I know. It's very emphasized, that idea emphasized in ancient religious stories such as those that are outlined in Genesis, or in Genesis with its strange insistence that, God is that which brings order out of chaos, formless potential, generates the world out of formless potential, and that we're somehow made in that image, which seems to me to be the case. And that the proper way, by the way, to go about acting in that image is to act in relationship to the potential that confronts you with truth and with courage, with careful articulation. That's the logos. And that if you do that, then what you bring forth is good. Not everybody is equipped to or interested in engaging in high-level discussion of abstract and creative ideas. You hear this idea that everyone's creative. That's a lie. It's as straightforward as that. True creativity is very, very rare. And if you happen to be a creative person, or if you happen to be someone who's profoundly interested in ideas, you are in a pronounced minority, just as you are if you happen to be extremely extroverted or extremely agreeable or extremely conscientious. These are minority issues, and what you do is you find like-minded people who are capable of engaging that. Heavyweight weightlifters compete with heavyweight weightlifters for a reason, and everyone thinks that's fine. And the same thing applies to intellectual and creative endeavors. So what you do is you try to find a community where that's the nature of the community, and you likely have to find a relationship like that as well. So I don't think so. I think what contributes to the siloing is the arrogance that goes along with it. Because if you can be interested in ideas and you can be creative, well, that's the arrogance of the intellect, right? That's the thing the Catholic Church had warned about for centuries, is the arrogance of the intellect. So because if you're wise as well as smart, and there is no relationship between being smart and being wise, they are not the same thing. There's no quick pathway from smart to wise. And many of the people who I've known who were very wise some of them were intellectually impaired and were still wise, So it's the arrogance that brings up the block. And I see this, for example, happening in the United States in particular, because the last time I went down there, for example, I had friends down there, and some of those friends are very, very smart people, and some of them were talking about the Trump voters, and they were talking about the Trump voters with contempt. And I thought, you better watch that, because that's 50% of the damn population. And it might be convenient to think that they're stupid and beneath you, but it's not conducive to a civil state. And there's no evidence that it's true, because there isn't a straight line between intelligent and wise. And so I think that if your character is developed and you're intelligent, you can have your siloed creative community, but you develop enough wisdom so that you can see all the things that people can do that are of high ethical utility that are outside the intellectual domain. You know, and I think that's why in the New Testament, I think that's why Christ is a carpenter, right? Because, well, first of all, a carpenter is one of those jobs that when you're dishonest, it manifests itself immediately because what you build falls down. And so if you're an honest carpenter, you build a good house. So there's a nice metaphor there. But it's also a warning in some sense against the equation of intellectual brilliance with moral superiority. And so if the intellects would drop their moral superiority, and fat chance there is of that, then the divide between the working class, say, and the elite would resolve. And there's every reason to have respect for decent working class people. I mean, it's on their labor, as the left-wingers at least hypothetically agree, that the entire edifice of the culture is resting. So you can have your cake and eat it too, but you have to not assume that your niche makes you superior. And it's very difficult for smart people, especially smart. There's this scene in Nietzsche's, it's in Thus Spake Zarathustra, where Zarathustra, the prophet, comes down from the mountain and he comes into a public square, and there's this crowd around this little midget who's only about this high, who has a gigantic ear, and everyone is marveling at him. Well, that's what the modern intellect is like. It's a midget with a giant, well, mouth generally, not an ear. And the being is underdeveloped, but the intellect is hyper activated. And it makes the person extraordinarily unbalanced. And it's partly because they can't compete outside the intellectual realm. And that makes them very bitter because they tend to think, well, God, I'm so smart, everything should just come to me. It's like, sorry, that's not how the world works. And it also, that attitude is immediately evident to people that they're talking to when they talk in the manner that they talk, if they are arrogant intellectuals of that sort. You see that in The Simpsons did a good job of that with Comic Book Guy, right? I mean, he completely useless in every possible dimension with an IQ of about 160. And it's very annoying to people who have an IQ of 160 that they can also be completely useless. But it happens a lot, so, yeah. There's so little emphasis in our popular culture, especially with regards to the so-called mainstream media, on discipline and responsibility, that there's a tremendous hunger for anything that pertains to that. And you have a right to be discussing that, I would say, because of your background, which, if nothing else, required a tremendous amount of discipline.
Yeah, and I ended up writing a book called Discipline Equals Freedom. And I'm lucky that I wrote it when I did, because if I would have written it 2 years later, everyone would have said, oh, everyone's talking about discipline now. So yeah, discipline, absolutely. Discipline does bring you freedom in life. And that's something that I kind of figured out over time. I didn't
so what do you mean by that? Like, how did you figure that out? And what do you mean by that? Because they're often, and you know, the classic sort of, what would you call it, romantic rebel is someone who is free from excessive order, let's say. They see freedom and discipline as antithetical rather than seeing one as a precondition for the other. And so how did you learn that discipline was a precondition for freedom? If I've got the equation, how did that manifest itself in your own life?
So we'll start off by saying this. And look, I was a young kid. I joined the Navy to go in the SEAL teams. I went through SEAL training. I showed up at a SEAL team 1. And when I got there, and as I look back, this is a very powerful thing, even though it's very simple. So I'm 19 years old when I show up at SEAL Team 1. I'm done with the basic SEAL training. And I have a goal in my head, which is this. I want to be a good SEAL. Mm-hmm. That's what I want to do. That's like, I don't know about anything else. This is what I want to do.
that?
I want to be a good SEAL. That's what I want. I want to be a good SEAL. And so as a 19-year-old with all kinds of energy, and we haven't talked about my childhood yet, but I was kind of like a very rebellious kid. When you talked about seeing a kid that looked like you could have handed him a club or a battle axe and he would have probably been feeling a little bit better, I was like that. I was constantly looking around for a club or a battle axe because that's what I felt like I needed to do. And it was beautiful because I was running around the woods as a young kid playing Army. And I just went and actually played Army. That's what I ended up doing. So I never really had to force myself into some mold that I didn't want to be into. So I got to SEAL Team 1, and now I just want to be a good SEAL. That's what I want. And so now that starts steering some of my decisions. And for the most part, it steered my decisions in a decent direction. Now, there were some times where, as I look back now, what I thought was a good SEAL was a little bit off, but luckily it wasn't 180 degrees off. It might have been off 30 degrees or 40 degrees. Right. And as I got older and more mature and I figured out more about what that ideal should look like to me, and I could keep chasing that ideal, that was good. But even to be a 19-year-old kid with a 70 or 80 degree corridor to move forward in is not a bad thing.
No, it's a gift.
It's a gift. Exactly. Mm-hmm. So then I'm looking around at other SEALs that were older than me and more senior to me and trying to figure out which one of those guys is a good SEAL.
Yeah.
And what I realized was that the guys that were working harder, for the most part, were good SEALs. Now there's just some people that are just way talented.
Right.
And they could show up, 3 minutes before a run or 3 minutes before we do a shooting competition, and they could just walk through it. No problem.
Right.
And that's great for them. It wasn't me. I'm not that great at anything, but I saw other guys that might not be great at anything either, but they worked hard. They showed up to work early. They did the drills that they were supposed to do. They had discipline. And when you have
has amalgamated statistics, and I hope I get this right, but it's approximately correct. If you work 10% longer hours, you make 40% more money. Right. And so, and I think your comments about talent are also dead on. It's like in any field of enterprise, there are people who are phenomenally gifted. And then if they work really hard, they're even more phenomenally gifted, right? Those are the people who break records. But that talent apart, hard work actually works. And with virtually everything, it might not make you the best at whatever it is you're pursuing, but it will certainly make you better than you are. And then I have this new book. I hope you got a copy, because did you get a copy? Okay, so I'm bringing it up for a particular reason. I have a chapter in this book called, there's two that are relevant. Imagine who you could be and then aim single-mindedly at that. That's one. And then the course, or what would you call it? A complementary chapter is work as hard as you possibly can on one thing and see what happens. And that's also predicated on this idea that discipline is a precondition to freedom. So you were fortunate, like you had this goal, right? So that meant you had a goal, which is a really big deal because you could learn about goals. You had a sense of a higher mode of moral being, that I would rather be a good SEAL than the person I am now. Well, it's a code of behavior and a way of perceiving. So there's an ethic in that. And then you said as well, your conception of what good SEAL meant changed as you matured, but that's also fine. It wouldn't have changed unless you would have pursued that initial only partially accurate goal. And so that's also a really good thing for people to understand is like, if you don't know what you're doing, aim at something. Is it the right thing? No, but it's better than just shooting randomly. So you aim at something, and then as you aim and you move towards it, you're going to find out why you're wrong. And then you might recalibrate your aim. And that's going to happen over and over because as you move towards a goal, it recedes or it broadens or it recedes and broadens. And otherwise you'd run out of things to do. When my clients first come to see me, one of the things I often ask them is, okay, well, let's say you look a year ahead. What do you want? What are we aiming at? your life isn't the way you want it to be. How would it look if it was the way you wanted it to be, or at least partly that way? Then we aim at that, right? And we look for impediments, psychological impediments, fears, avoidance strategies, that sort of thing, and we develop strategies, and we try to move towards that, I would say, ideal. All right, to understand the categories of myth, we'll say, we have to understand something about the nature of categorization. Now, categorization is a tricky thing, and we're going to run through some complicated ideas relatively quickly. You know, you think you put things in the same category because they're similar, but the problem is that, first of all, that's not an answer. It's just a restatement of the initial proposition. And second of all, you can put things in the same category that are by no means identical, and you often do that. And third, it's things that are similar are often also importantly different, and so picking which element of similarity, you know, like let's say you have a group of books. Well, are they the same? Well, obviously no, because unless they're, you know, all the same book. But the category of books is a pretty strange category because the content of the books differs completely. Well, you could still make a group of books, and you pick some arbitrary element that unites them and consider that grounds to make a category. There's other categories, more scientific categories, and scientific categories tend to actually contain things that are very, very similar across multiple dimensions. Like protons are like that. As far as I can tell, there's nothing that distinguishes one proton from another, and the same with electrons. And you know, the set of triangles is like that because you can define it precisely. But most of the categories that human beings use aren't so neat, and the problem with that is that unless the categories are neat, like scientific categories, it's very difficult to investigate them scientifically. So for example, you might do research on a group of people with anxiety disorders, but the problem with that is that the anxiety disorder category is so heterogeneous that it's almost impossible to identify the commonalities across all the people who are in that category, and that's partly because the category isn't actually a scientific category. It's a hybrid category. It's a practical category. I can give you an example of that. No, I can't because I must not have saved it. Anyways, many of the DSM categories, so these are categories for psychopathology, require, if you're part of that category, imagine there's 7 symptoms that you could have, or 8 symptoms that you could have that would put you in that category, like antisocial personality. 8 symptoms: you steal, you kick, you hit, you bite, you know, you're abusive. I don't remember the categories precisely, but you can be in the category if you have symptoms 2 through 5, and you can be in the category if you have symptoms 6 through 8. They aren't the same symptoms, but you're in the same category. And you think, well, how the hell can that be? Well, that's a family resemblance category, roughly speaking, and lots of the things that we use are family resemblance categories. There's a prototype, and then if you have enough of the features of that prototype, imagine the prototype has 10 features, and if you have 6 of those features, you get to be in that category. But it means that the category is actually quite diverse, and that's one of the problems that plagues psychiatry as a science and clinical psychology as a science. It's a really big problem because if the categories aren't homogeneous, then it's very difficult to draw conclusions about the members of the category. And the psychologists and the psychiatrists claim that those are scientific categories, but they're not, and they can't be, partly because they're aimed at the classification of health or ideal versus non-health or non-ideal, and partly because they play multiple roles, eh? I mean, the category isn't there just to provide neat demarcations for scientific study. The category is there to give people a language to talk about certain sets of symptoms, to diagnose, because, you know, when you come in and you have a set of symptoms, you might want to know what what they are so that you also know what they aren't. It's really a relief often to find a diagnosis. And then of course the diagnosis has certain implications for treatment and for billing and for all of that, so the category has to play all of those roles. So there's multiple types of category. And the categories that we're talking about in relationship to mythology aren't scientific categories. They're categories about the world construed as a place to act. So here's a way to think about it. You're always looking at the world through a framework of reference, and you have to do that because there isn't very much of you. You can't see the whole world at once, and in fact the amount of the world you actually see is so small you can't believe it. The central part of your vision is zipping around producing a pretty high resolution representation of exactly what you're looking at, but outside of that center, like if I look at you, I can't see her eyes. I can see her glasses, but barely. I can't even tell whether you're male or female. The person past that, I can't see at all. Now you don't notice that, you know. You don't notice that you're that blind because your central vision is always popping around, illuminating that tiny space. But you're so damn blind, it's just mind-boggling. And I'm sure some of you have seen the Invisible Gorilla video, you know, where a gorilla comes into the video and you don't notice, which is somewhat shocking because you would think that you would notice a gorilla. But what happens is that you actually don't notice something unless it interferes with what you're doing. And because what are you going to do? Notice everything? You can't do that. You can hardly notice anything. So what you do is you pick something to focus on. It's usually something that you value, because why else would you focus on it? So that means that your value system determines the direction of your perception. Bloody well think about that for a minute. That's a Buddhist idea, right? People live in a kind of illusion, and sometimes that illusion causes suffering, and they can transform the way they look at the world, and that can release them from their suffering. But the idea that you do live in an illusion, well, I don't know if it's exactly an illusion, but you certainly do live within a framework of perception that's determined by your values. Now that is so weird, you know, because we never think of the world as something that reveals itself through our values. But of course it does, because you look at what you want. You aim at what you want, and once you've aimed, the world lays itself out for you, and that's exactly how perception works. That's why I represented it this way. You're always somewhere, that's point A, and that's somewhere in some place in some time, and you always have some notion about what you want to have happen next. You know, you're going to go to the next class maybe, you've got a plan after this. In this class you have a plan, you're hoping to learn something, I presume, and maybe you have a goal with regards to a grade, and that's nested inside your desire to get a degree, and that's nested inside your desire to be educated and to have a career and have a successful life. So attending to me at the moment, the reason you're doing that is because all of those values exist within you simultaneously, focusing your attention. And so you're attending to me and not to something else, assuming that all of you with your computers open aren't surfing the web, which you might be, but assuming that you're focusing, whatever you're focusing on is directed by what you value. And some of that can be unconscious. In fact, a lot of it is unconscious, because you know it's very difficult for you to get control of what you pay attention to. You know what that's like. You're trying to study, it's kind of a boring paper. Christ, your attention is just like everywhere, you know. Maybe you'll vacuum under the bed instead of doing the reading the paper, you know. You can't get a grip on that thing, so your attention has an autonomy. And that's another psychoanalytic idea, you know, because you kind of think, well, you're in control. It's like, really? You ever try telling yourself what to do? How does that work for you? I'm going to go to the gym 3 times a week. Right, sure you are. Yeah, I'm going to quit eating sugar for a month. It's like, how long does that last? It's like 15 minutes, and you're eating like 3 chocolate bars. If you pursue the things in your life that are meaningful, once you've oriented yourself, and that means accepting the challenges that come along with that, because one of the things that you'll find, you even find this in music, if you know a piece of music completely, then you tend not to want to listen to it anymore. there still has to be some challenge in it. You still have to track it, and sometimes music is so complex you just can't. It just sounds like noise. Modern music is often like that because it's so, well, it tends towards the chaotic, and so I find it difficult to listen to because I can't get a handle on it. But then, you know, so it's too challenging. And then there's other music, pop music is often like this. It's catchy the first 2 times you hear it, and then you never want to hear it again. It's too much, there's too much predictability and not enough chaos. And hopefully you find a piece of music that's somewhere in the middle. You can listen to it 50 or 100 times, and each time you listen to it, there's still some new nuance in it that you didn't expect before. And so, well, you kind of want to set up your life like that, so that, and I think you see that the phenomena of meaning manifests itself at the area, at the locale of optimal challenge. So if the thing, so one of the things, for example, I might say, well, let's say you want to set some goals for yourself. We say, well, they're remarkable goals, but they're too unattainable. You're just going to find it frustrating to pursue them. It's going to be too punishing. And then we might say, well, here's a goal, and you think, well, I could do that, you know, standing on my head. There's no challenge in it. Well, both of those two extremes are going to leave you in a state that isn't characterized by the optimization of engagement and meaning. One is too difficult, it's too punishing, it's the judge and nothing else, and the other is the ultimate and merciful mothers. It's like you win no matter how you play. So then you calibrate it. You say, well, you know, I'm up for a challenge at this level. I wouldn't recommend that, because that's just a bit like people do that. You might want to investigate your character in detail and decide, you know, what's going on at this level of analysis. That's pretty harsh, but you can certainly continually retool yourself at more micro levels, and I think what you do is you pick the level of retooling that optimizes your willingness to be engaged in it. And then what's so interesting about that is that, I think, is that you get the benefits of perfection, so to speak, while still being imperfect. Your actual imperfection has nothing to do with it. What's relevant is the journey that you're undertaking to rectify the imperfection. So instead of aiming to be the entity without flaws, you're aiming to be the entity that continues to realize its flaws and overcome them. Well, that's a game you can play forever. You don't take responsibility for things that you don't accept. You only take responsibility for things that you do accept. You say, well, the world is fundamentally flawed because its fundamental nature is vulnerability, intolerable vulnerability. I'm not going to take any responsibility for that. That's really Cain's attitude in the story of Cain and Abel. He externalizes responsibility for the catastrophe of his life, and therefore he doesn't make the right sacrifices. And so the paradoxical injunction here is, accept responsibility for the catastrophe of your life. And that way you transcend it simultaneously. And there's an unbelievably hopeful message in there. And the message is, you're actually strong enough to do that. You just don't know it. And you won't find out till you do it. You can't find out till you do it. But if you did it, you'd find out that it was true. It's a massive risk. It's the ultimate in risks, right? You have to be willing to lose your life in order to find it. It's like, exactly right. So that picture, when I started to understand that picture, well, every time I look at it, it just blows me away. I can't, it's unbelievably, it's an unbelievably sophisticated set of ideas. But I don't think it's much different, really, than this idea. I mean, Buddha finds his enlightenment under a tree. It's not fluke that that's the case. That's his natural environment. And he's sitting in the lotus here. The lotus opens up. It's this thing that springs up from the depths, and he sits there illuminated the same way. He's got a halo that's the sun that stands for higher consciousness, and he's transcended by accepting the fact that life is suffering. He's transcended the limitations that are part of mortality. You see that symbol there? That swastika, you see it there? It's reversed. The Nazis reversed it. Well, think about that. I mean, they weren't stupid. Their symbols had meaning. Is what the swastika represented was what this represents reversed. Well, that's a very bad idea. This is the thing that this idea is what enables people to transcend their suffering. And Buddha said, well, don't be too attached to things. And what does that mean? It doesn't mean deny the world. It might mean deny the world if you're too in love with the material, like with material well-being, let's say, then your pathway to transcendence and meaning might be to abandon that because it's constraining you. It's making you less than you could be. But the fundamental lesson, the more fundamental lesson that's underneath that is don't let what you are stop you from being what you could be. Right. And so then the question is, well, what do you identify with? Do you identify with what you are? Then you're a tyrant. Do you identify with chaos? Because that's the opposite of order, say. Then you're nihilistic. Well, you don't identify with either of those. You know that they're both necessary. You know that you have to live with both of them, but you identify with the capacity to continually transcend what you are. And then you seek out error. That's what humility is. It's like, I'm error-ridden. It's like, so I want to put myself in a situation where I can discover one of my errors, hopefully not in a way that's going to knock me completely out of the game, right? I want to seek out a challenge. I want to find out where my limits are. I want to find out where there's not enough of me yet. And I want to do that in a way that's engaging because, you know, you can wear yourself out fighting dragons, obviously. You can exhaust yourself completely, and that's not helpful. You know, one of the things I learned, for example, when I was coaching lawyers, these were people who had very high-end careers, and so they had an infinite workload. No matter how much they worked, flat out, there was always way more work that they should do. It's a very difficult thing to learn to manage. And so they were exhausting themselves, and I said, well, you know, you have to work less per day. It's like, well, no, that's not happening. I can't do that. And so what I learned over time was, okay, so this is what you have to do. Every 3 months you have to block off 4 days and go have a vacation. And you have to plan that in advance so it's in your calendar so that your secretary doesn't book your time. And then you need that because you have to recuperate enough so that you can work as hard as you're going to work. And of course they were nervous about that. And I said, well, look, we can calibrate this. Let's keep track of your billable hours over the next year and see if they increase or decrease. Because I bet you if you take more time off, you'll actually have more billable hours. You'll actually have your cake and eat it too. You'll get to have a vacation and you'll be more productive. And that inevitably, that was what happened. And so that's a matter of calibrating the game properly, right? You want to play a game that you can play today, but also one that you can play next week and next month. We're not talking about, you know, your career this week. We're talking about you having a career that lasts 30 years, that doesn't kill you, that doesn't make you hate yourself or the job, that doesn't make you bitter, that doesn't wear you to a frazzle. So it has to be optimized. And so I think that you can, in fact, decide to take on the load that's optimally meaningful if you want, and then you get to have your cake and eat it too. You're on the pathway to continual incremental improvement. You only have to burn off a feather at a time instead of having the whole bloody thing burst into flames. But it's a constant source of renewal. And there's an idea that to be renewed, you have to drink the water of life, right? That's an old mythological idea. And what's the water? The water of life, chaos is water. Water is chaos. Water is what washes away too much order. And to stay continually, let's say, refreshed by the water of life is to take on exactly the right amount of chaos to make sure that your garden is properly nourished. And I think meaning is actually the marker of that. And as I said, you know that I wouldn't consider myself either naive or particularly optimistic person. I don't think I'm either of those. But this is actually an idea, this is one of the only ideas that I've ever found that I really believe to be rock solid. I actually think that it's true. And it's very optimistic because it says you can use your sense of meaning to calibrate your progress through life. But there's rules. You have to aim at the highest possible good that you can conceive. Now, and that's subject to update because what the hell do you know? But you start by aiming at the star you can see rather than the dimmer one that you can't yet perceive. And then you decide that you're going to do that honestly, right? That's a big decision. So the first decision, I think, in some sense, is a decision of love. You're going to decide that being is worthwhile and that you're going to work for its betterment. And that's a decision that's based on love. And the second decision is based on truth. Having made that decision, you're going to play a straight game. Having made those two decisions, I think that you can allow your sense of meaning to calibrate your pathway. And then what's so interesting is that you hit a state that's as close to paradisal as you're going to hit right away, because being engaged like that, it's better to be engaged in the solution of a complex problem than not to have a problem at all. And that's no different than saying it's better for there to be being than non-being, because being is a problem. And so if you want to have no problems, then you have no being. And you could say, well, being is so miserable that maybe that's the route we should take. And fair enough, but maybe you can have your cake and eat it too. You can have the damn problem. It can be a problem worth solving, and you can be so engaged in solving the problem that it justifies the fact that the problem exists. And then you get to have the problem and the solution at the same time, and maybe that's better than not having the problem at all. And I believe that, because one of the things I have seen, and I've seen this being so interesting when I've been lecturing to people, especially more recently, and this has also manifested itself on YouTube. I'm talking to people a lot about responsibility, and it's young men in particular that seem to be responding to that. And I think that's partly because I think that young women, in some sense, have their responsibility map already laid out for them. It's also less voluntary in some sense for women, because they have more complicated problems to solve in the first part of their life, right? Because they have to get the family problem solved. But whatever. I've been talking in a very delineated manner about responsibility, which is a strange thing to sell to people, but responsibility is what gives your life meaning. And so then you might say, well, then take on ultimate responsibility. And what happens? You have an ultimately meaningful life. And then you might say, well, if your life is ultimately meaningful, doesn't matter if it's punctuated by tragedy or even predicated on tragedy. It's worth it. And I think that's true. And everything I've seen indicates to me that's true. Every time I get my clients to take on more responsibility, and it isn't an injunction. You're a bad person, you should take on responsibility. It has nothing to do with that. You can define the damn responsibility. It isn't something that someone else should impose on you. It's not a matter of doing what you should do in some abstract manner. It's not that. It's the choice of what game you're going to play. And you can play the game of the seeker, I would say, and if you play that game, then everyone wins. And it's the best game you can play. And so the answer, in some sense, to the tragedy of life, to the catastrophe of life, to the fall, is to adopt the responsibility of mortality that goes along with that, and to play that game maximally. And paradoxically, it's in the willingness to do that the solution emerges. And I have done my best with every single thing I've talked to you guys about. I have done my best to do what Dostoevsky does in his novels, which is I make a proposition and then I spend months or years trying to figure out if I can take the bloody thing apart, if there's something wrong with it, because I want to find out. I want to hit it with a hammer and see if it breaks. And what I've been trying to do is to tell you all the things that I've gathered, let's say, or laid out or articulated or discovered over the last 30 years that I have not been able to break with the biggest hammer that I could take to them. And I guess that's the fundamental one, is that I believe that the idea that lurks in these images, derived from very different cultures, it's the same idea. Life is suffering. Right, indisputable. What do you do about that? You voluntarily accept it and then strive to overcome the suffering that's a consequence of that. And you do that for you, and you do that in a way that makes it better for other people. And then that works. And one question might be, well, how well does it work? And the answer is, the only way that you can find out is by trying it. That's it. That's the existential element of it. The proof is to be derived by the incarnation of the attitude in your own life. No one can tell you how it will work for you. It's the thing that your destiny is to discover that. And you have to make the decisions to begin with. It's like, because you can't do this without commitment. You have to commit to it first. That's the act of faith that Kierkegaard was so insistent upon. You have to say, I'm going to act as if being is good. I'm going to act as if truth is the pathway to enlightenment. I'm going to act as if I should pursue the deepest meaning possible in my life. And there's reasons to do none of those. They're real reasons. So it's really a decision. But you can't find out what the consequence of the decision is unless you make the decision. I think the same thing happens when you get married, by the way. Is that if you think you might leave, you're not married. And then you think, well, the marriage didn't succeed. It's like, well, maybe you were never married. because the rule is you don't get to leave. And there's a reason for that rule. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't situations where there should be exceptions made for that. That's not the point. The point is that there's some games you don't get to play unless you're all in. And the other thing that's so interesting about being alive is that you're all in. No matter what you do, you're all in. This is going to kill you. So I think you might as well play the most magnificent game you can while you're waiting. Because do you have anything better to do? Really? Why not pick the best thing possible that you could do? Why not do that? Maybe you could justify your wretched existence to yourself that way. I think you could. That's what it looks like. You know, people find such meaning in the responsibilities they adopt, it stops making them ask questions about what life is for. If you have a newborn child, for example, like unless you're really in a bad way, psychotically depressed, or maybe your personality really needs some retooling, you stop thinking about anything but ensuring that that baby is doing well. And if someone comes along and asks you an existential question about your commitment to that, the right response is, why are you asking me such stupid questions when this is manifesting itself right in front of your eyes? Like, how blind can you be? That isn't a time for questions about the meaning of life. The answer is right in front of you. And if you can't see it, it's not because life has no meaning, it's because you're blind. I mean, that's what the image of the Virgin Mother and the child is all about. It's like, what's the answer to the meaning of life? Here's an answer. It's like, well, I'm going to criticize that. Well, go right ahead. You know, it's like what you're like a what do you call that? A termite gnawing on a temple. There's no utility in that sort of criticism. It's blindness. And it's the same thing with regards to the path of the hero. It's like it glistens in front of you and you can criticize it. It's like, fine. Put the cart before the horse and see how far you get. So I thought, to bring full closure to the class, I was trying to solve this terrible puzzle that confronted me and many other people about how it was that human beings got themselves in such a tangle about what they believed. Such a tangle that we were pointing the ultimate weapons of destruction at one another, which, by the way, we are still doing. And I thought, okay, well, I understand that. We need our belief systems. They orient us. And that means there will be conflict between belief systems, and that can be a catastrophe. And that's being played out everywhere, again, in very many ways. What's the solution to that? Well, one possibility is there's no solution. It's just mayhem all the way around. Could be the case. But it seemed to me, as I delved into it, that the proper solution to that was to live properly as an individual. Because you're more powerful than you think. Way more powerful than you think. I mean, God only knows what you are in the final analysis. You're blind to your own weaknesses, but you're also blind to your own strengths. And so then I think, well, if you got your act together, it'd be better for you, and instantly it would be better for your family, assuming they wanted you to get your act together, and not everyone does, and then it would be better for the community. It's like, how far could you take that? If you stopped wasting time, and if you stopped lying, and if you oriented yourself to the highest possible good that you could conceive of, and you committed to that, how much good could you do? Well, I would say, why don't you find out? So that's what I think you should do. You should find out. You don't have anything better to do. And there's nothing in it, as far as I've been able to tell, there's nothing in it but good. So maybe you could sort yourself out so that you wanted nothing but the good. And then maybe you could help make that manifest in the world. And maybe we wouldn't have all these terrible problems then. At least we'd have fewer of them, and that would be a start. So it's the answer to the problem of humanity is the integrity of the individual. That's the answer. So, and states that are predicated on that realization are healthy. So, and states that aren't are doomed to stagnation and catastrophic collapse. And personalities that are predicated on self-tyranny and the tyranny of others are doomed to collapse. So, and then you think, well, what's the barrier? And the barrier is, are you willing to accept the responsibility? And part of the answer to that is, reduce the damn responsibility until it's tolerable. You don't have to fix everything at once. You could just start by fixing the things that you could fix. Or you could even do it more. You could do it with even less self-sacrifice. You could start by fixing only the things that you want to fix. God, you can get a massive way that way. So do it. See what happens. That's what you should have been taught in university right from the beginning. It's like, aim at the highest good. Tool yourself into something that can attain it. And go out there and manifest it in the world. And everything that comes your way will be a blessing. And so all you have to do is give up your resentment and your hatred. I know that's a hard thing to give up because you have plenty of reason for it.